Huawei in trouble? Can the Chinese tech giant survive its latest skirmish with the United States?
Welcome to Plain English, the podcast that goes at the right speed for English language learners. Listen now and read the transcript online at plainenglish.com. Now, here's Jeff, your host for today's episode.
You might be listening to this podcast on a Huawei phone. If so, the maker of your phone is in trouble. The chief financial officer of Huawei was arrested in Canada on suspicion of avoiding financial sanctions with Iran, and that is having a negative effect on its business around the world. Merry Christmas Eve. I'm Jeff, and JR is the producer. For those of you who celebrate Christmas, I hope you got your holiday preparations and shopping done. Actually, I hope I got my shopping done. I'm recording this early, and I still have a few things to do between now and the big day. What are your Christmas plans? Send me a note to Jeff, Jeff, at plainenglish.com, and let me know what you and your family do at this time of year. I'd love to learn about the different traditions people have around the world. I mentioned before that we don't take any holidays here at Plain English, so there will be new episodes each Monday and Thursday without interruption, no days off. But to accommodate some of the travel and time off on the extended team that brings you Plain English, we are writing and recording some episodes farther in advance than normal. So over the next 2 weeks or so, they may not be quite as timely, quite as current as usual. I've got a couple episode topics in my back pocket that I've been waiting to do, so we'll do those over the next few weeks. We'll get going on the Huawei story in just a second, but before we do, I wanted to remind you about Mosalingua, our online learning partner. You can see all they have to offer over at plainenglish.com/learn, Learn, learn. There's a lot of great stuff available. First of all, they have the 6,000 best words you need to know in English. And they don't just start with A, and 6,000 words later, you get to Z. It's not like that at all. It's all based on where you are, what you know, and they show you the words that are best for your exact level and your interests. There's also great context, so you can watch clips of movies, read articles, listen to audio, all kinds of things. They've helped 6 million language learners over the years, so you know they're high quality. Go to plainenglish.com/learn, Learn, learn, to explore all the exciting resources of Mosalingua. Huawei is in deep trouble. The Chinese firm is one of the world's largest manufacturers of smartphones and, most importantly, of the complicated telecommunications equipment that makes internet and phone service possible. They are making a big push to develop the so-called 5G wireless networks that will be even faster and more reliable than the 4G cellular networks we currently use. So, in addition to the phones, they make the complicated commercial equipment that your providers use in the background. But Huawei has hit some stormy waters. That means they are in dangerous times. They have long been banned in the United States. The government here in the US believes that the Chinese government could potentially use Huawei equipment to spy on customers. The US believes that the Chinese government has a great deal of influence over Huawei, and that if too much of our communication infrastructure were tied to a company controlled by a foreign government, well, then that would pose a national security risk. The specific worry is that the code embedded deep inside the equipment could give sensitive national data back to Beijing. There is also the risk, in the eyes of the US at least, that malicious code could do harm in the future. Think about a future where self-driving cars and trucks, for example, are all on 5G networks, and you can see why that has some people worried. Huawei, for its part, says it is not controlled by the Chinese government, that in fact it is employee-owned. It also says that it has 46 out of the top 50 telecommunications companies as customers, and that violating their trust would not make commercial business sense. The United States is not alone in its suspicion of Huawei. Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan have all banned the company from selling equipment in their countries, but Britain allows it. Britain actually has a special committee that reviews all the code in Huawei equipment to make sure there are no dangers to national security buried in the code. Huawei says this committee's work ensures that there is no malicious code in the equipment it sells abroad. Then came the latest bombshell. Meng Wanzhou, the company's chief financial officer, or CFO, was arrested in Canada a couple of weeks ago at the request of American authorities. They have charged her with purposely avoiding international sanctions against Iran. The US and Europe placed sanctions on Iran. Essentially, they said companies in the US and Europe could not do business with Iran. So what, you might ask? Huawei is a Chinese company. They don't have to follow American laws about doing business in Iran. And that's true, except that they used the big international banks that do have to follow American laws. The international bank HSBC discovered that Huawei tricked it into processing payments in Iran, which is against the law in the US. HSBC worked with the US government once they discovered that they had been deceived. That's why the Canadian authorities arrested Ms. Meng when she stepped off a plane in Vancouver. The specific charges against her personally are still confidential. However, it's likely that she's going to be accused of bank fraud or some similar charge. Ever since her arrest, Huawei has seen its support across the world dry up. The German telecommunications company Orange has said it will not use Huawei products in its 5G implementation. Deutsche Telekom, a big provider in Germany, is reviewing its purchases of Huawei equipment. BT, a provider in Britain, said the same thing. They would not be using Huawei products. Those companies are making the decision that doing business with Huawei at this point is too much of a reputational risk for them. China has retaliated against Canada by arresting 2 Canadians living in China, a former diplomat and an entrepreneur. Both have been held for questioning. One of their friends has described the interrogation as a nightmare. This has become a 3-way international incident. China and the United States are now rivals in many respects, and their conflict over Huawei is just one of the many ways in which the 2 countries are in a power struggle. Canada is a close ally of the United States and a trading partner of China, but they probably want nothing to do with the rivalry between the US and China. As one person in Canada put it, Canada is caught in the battle between 2 elephants, and we have our hands tied. How bad is this for Huawei? It's bad that they'll lose business in Europe, that's for sure. But the big market for 5G equipment and handsets will be in China itself, so their biggest growth market is probably not in doubt at all. I get the sense that this is the kind of thing we'll need to get used to in the future as the rivalry between America and China intensifies. Today I want to say hi to Daniel from Brazil, who listens on Spotify and reads the transcripts on the website. He's looking to improve his accent, listening, and grammar with plain English. Thanks for being with us, Daniel. And that just reminds me that on our website, not only do we have a transcript, but we have a transcript that shows you the definitions of the hardest words in your own language. Right now, we support Portuguese. That's probably the one Daniel reads. Portuguese, Spanish, Japanese, French, Italian, and Chinese. So if you go to the website, just hover your mouse over a highlighted word or tap on it if you're on a tablet or smartphone. Do that, and it shows you the definition of the word instantly. No stopping to look up the word in a dictionary, no retyping the word, no looking for the right context. We do it by hand with individual translators in all the languages, so you're getting the context of about 100 English words and phrases in each episode. Check out today's transcript by going to plainenglish.com/114. Time for a phrasal verb. Today, it's dry up. I love these phrasal verbs because they're so common in everyday speech that I think nothing of them. Then, when I have to describe them for you, I laugh at how silly they are sometimes. Dry up. Okay, how to explain this? All right, start with something that you think is like a continuous flow. It can be physical, like an oil well, right? It just continuously produces oil. Oil keeps coming out of the ground in an oil well. Or it can be something more intangible, like a flow of money. Well, if something is continuously flowing, but then it stops, then you say that thing dried up. Huawei's business outside China is starting to dry up. They were doing good business in Europe, stealing customers from rivals Nokia and Ericsson. But now their business outside of China is starting to dry up with this latest controversy. It's not gone completely, but it's starting to dry up. Inside China is another story, of course. What else? Support for Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, is starting to dry up. Not a lot of people were satisfied with the Brexit deal she negotiated. We talked about that on Thursday. I wouldn't say she was ever really popular, but the support she has had is starting to dry up, to disappear. She's losing support. I read a story about Zimbabwe, a country in Africa, which is having fuel shortages. The supply of gasoline dried up in that country a few weeks ago. Most of us are used to a world in which there's gas at the gas station, right? We might not like the price, but it's always there. In Zimbabwe last week, the supply dried up. People waited for hours, but there just wasn't any gas to buy. In troubled countries, oftentimes supplies of basic goods like medicine and food can dry up. That's the case in Venezuela these days. It's a really sad situation, but in many towns and cities, the supply of everyday staples has dried up. They can't get what they need to eat and stay healthy. Okay, that's all for today's episode of Plain English. Don't forget Mosa Lingua at plainenglish.com/learn, Learn, learn, because that's what you'll be doing over there at Mosa Lingua. If you're like me, you'll have some time off at the holidays. I'll be practicing my Spanish. Maybe you'll be working on your English, and Mosa Lingua is a great way to do that. Learn all about the fantastic resources they have at plainenglish.com/learn. Once again, from JR and me, have a very Merry Christmas tomorrow. If you don't celebrate Christmas, well, then have a good Tuesday. We'll be back again on Thursday.